On a quiet night, under a sky full of stars, the people of Earth never expected what was about to happen. Everything seemed peaceful. The Earth was living in a fragile calm, with nations quietly going about their business, ignoring the growing tensions just beneath the surface. No one had predicted the sudden rise of the enemy, an alien force from beyond the stars. They came with strength, determination, and the kind of technology that Earth had never seen before. That it wasn't just their firepower that made them dangerous. It was their strategy. They attacked swiftly, hitting every corner of the globe with surgical precision. Within hours, Earth's defenses were overwhelmed. Cities crumbled, and millions were forced to flee their homes. The enemy was relentless, sweeping across the land with no mercy. Governments and military leaders scrambled to find answers, but nothing could stop the destruction. In the midst of the chaos, two very different groups of people found themselves caught in the same fate. The first were the soldiers, brave men and women who had volunteered to defend their world, now facing an enemy they could hardly understand. The second group were the prisoners, those who had committed crimes in their past and were now forgotten in the prisons of Earth. For them, the war meant nothing but a harsh reality. They were trapped with no way out. But the fate of these two groups was about to change. The aliens, seeing the power of Earth's divided nations, decided to play a cruel game with the humans. They rounded up both the soldiers and the criminals, chaining them together in pairs, as if to mock them. The chains were not only physical but symbolic. The enemy wanted to break both groups, the warriors who fought for freedom and the criminals, who had already lost it. They made no distinction between the two. All were to be punished. The prisoners and soldiers had no choice but to march. Some were angry, some were confused, but all shared one thing in common. They were forced to move across a barren wasteland. The alien ships that had invaded Earth left behind only destruction in their wake. The landscape was scarred, with cities reduced to rubble and the air heavy with the smell of smoke and burnt metal. But this was just the beginning of their suffering. The aliens had bigger plans for them. As the prisoners and soldiers walked, they found themselves being led toward a dark, unknown place. A toxic planet, far from Earth, awaited them, a place where survival was nearly impossible. They had heard rumors, whispered in the darkness of their cells, about this place. It was said to be a dead world, filled with strange, poisonous gases, and dangerous creatures lurking in the shadows. But no one really knew for sure what awaited them there. Despite the heat and the suffocating air, the chains around their wrists remained unyielding. They were forced to keep moving, dragged along by alien guards who showed no mercy. The soldiers tried to hold their heads high, desperate to maintain some shred of dignity. The prisoners, on the other hand, had long given up on anything resembling hope. But they shared one thing in common now: survival. The journey was grueling. They had no food, no water, and no shelter. The days blended together, each one more exhausting than the last. Their bodies were covered in cuts and bruises, their strength fading with every step they took. But the chains kept them together, forcing them to move as one. And in the distance, the alien ships flew overhead, keeping watch over their every move. Some soldiers tried to escape, but the alien guards were always there, ready to punish any sign of defiance. It wasn't just physical punishment that kept them in line, it was the fear of the unknown. The fear of what awaited them on the toxic planet. They didn't know what horrors they would face, but they could feel them coming. Every step they took brought them closer to something terrible, and they couldn't turn back. As they continued their march, the soldiers began to talk among themselves. They had been chosen for something more than just survival. They had been chosen to fight, even if they had to fight alongside the very criminals they had once sworn to lock away. The situation was strange, but the enemy had forced them into this impossible situation. Some of them were beginning to form alliances with the prisoners, realizing that they might need each other if they were going to survive what was coming. And so, The march continued, with no end in sight. The only thing they had now was each other, their chains, and the faint hope that somehow, together, they could face whatever the aliens had planned for them. But the journey was far from over. It had only just begun, after what felt like an avulaken eternity of walking. The group of prisoners and soldiers finally reached their destination. The sky above was a sickly green, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and dry, with deep fissures revealing pools of bubbling acid. The air was thick with a strange burning scent, and every breath felt like inhaling sharp needles. It was a world of death, a world that seemed to exist solely to punish anyone who set foot on it. The aliens had led them to this barren, toxic wasteland, a place that seemed to have once been alive, but now lay in ruin. There were no signs of any living creatures, just the occasional twisted, skeletal tree or the remnants of what might have been a thriving city long ago. But there was nothing here now. Only emptiness. They were dropped at the edge of a vast, crumbling ruin. The prisoners and soldiers were still chained together, and it seemed as if their entire existence now depended on one simple fact: survival. It didn't matter who they were or what they had done in the past. The only thing that mattered now was how long they could endure the harsh conditions of this alien world. The first challenge they faced was the heat. The planet's twin suns beat down on them, scorching their skin and making their every movement feel like an effort. It was almost impossible to find any shelter, as the few structures that remained were either destroyed or too unstable to enter. The prisoners and soldiers found themselves huddling together, seeking what little shade they could find. But it was clear that the planet had no mercy for them. As they walked deeper into the ruins, the true horror of the planet began to reveal itself. The air grew thicker, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. Strange creatures with scales like rusted metal and eyes that glowed in the dark stalked the group from the shadows. They didn't attack, not yet, but their presence was enough to send shivers down their spines. It was clear that they were not alone on this planet, and the creatures didn't seem to care who had arrived. They were simply waiting for the right moment to strike. For the prisoners, the sight of the alien creatures was a reminder of the punishment they had been sentenced to. They were nothing more than pawns in the aliens' twisted game, and now they were left to face a planet that would test every ounce of their will to survive. But for the soldiers, the sight was a call to action. They knew they had to fight, even if it meant fighting alongside the very criminals they had once guarded. As the day wore on, the group was forced to make camp in a crumbling building, hoping that it would offer them some protection from the harsh environment. They set up makeshift shelters using whatever scraps of metal and debris they could find. But the real struggle had only just begun. The planet's toxic atmosphere made it difficult to breathe, and the constant threat of the alien creatures kept them on edge. Sleep was impossible. Each person remained alert, listening for any sounds of movement in the distance. The next morning, the group was forced to move again. They had no choice. The alien guards, who had remained silent so far, began pushing them forward, their weapons trained on the group, forcing them to continue their journey across the toxic wasteland. Every step felt like a death march, but they had no option but to keep moving. The chains still held them together, binding them in a way that made it impossible to escape. As the group trudged through the ruined landscape, a new realization began to dawn on them. They were not just walking through a wasteland. They were walking through a place that had once been home to a thriving civilization. There were signs of ancient structures, broken statues, and ruined buildings that hinted at a time when this planet had been alive. But now, it was nothing more than a graveyard. And the creatures that watched them were the only remaining inhabitants of this once great world. The soldiers began to speak more openly among themselves. They were used to following orders, used to being part of a larger machine. But here, they were alone. They had no idea how to survive in this harsh environment. No idea how to protect themselves from the alien creatures or the planet's toxic air. They had to rely on each other. But the criminals, too, had learned to survive in the harshest of conditions. They had been forgotten, abandoned by society, but now they had knowledge that could help them all survive. For the first time, the soldiers and the prisoners began to work together, sharing what they knew about survival. It wasn't easy. Tensions still ran high. The soldiers didn't trust the prisoners, and the prisoners resented the soldiers' authority. But both sides knew that they had no choice. If they didn't work together, they would die alone. As the days passed, the group continued to struggle against the challenges of the toxic planet. They scavenged for food and water, though both were scarce. They fought off the creatures that stalked them, using whatever weapons they could find. The alien ships that had dropped them off seemed to be watching from above, but they never interfered. It was as if they were waiting, watching, seeing how long the humans could last on this godforsaken world. And still, the chains held them together, keeping them linked for better or worse. They had no way of knowing what the aliens wanted from them, or how long they would be forced to survive on this toxic planet. But one thing was clear: they were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their freedom, for the chance to prove that even in the face of unimaginable odds, they could endure. But in the back of their minds, a chilling thought lingered. The aliens had thrown them onto this world for a reason. There was something more to this planet, something darker that they had yet to understand. The days on the toxic planet grew longer and harder. The sun's rays, intense and unrelenting, burned their skin, and the air, thick with poisonous gases, made every breath feel like fire in their lungs. The once pristine ruins they had been dropped in were now little more than a maze of decaying buildings and lifeless streets. Every corner they turned brought new dangers, hidden creatures, unstable terrain, and the constant feeling of being hunted. The prisoners and soldiers had no choice but to continue on. The chains that bound them together were not just a physical reminder of their punishment. They were a constant symbol of the aliens' control over their fate. They were trapped. Alone, they would never survive. But together, despite the animosity and distrust, there was a faint hope that they could endure this nightmare. That hope began to dwindle, however, as their water supply ran dangerously low. For days they had been searching for anything that might provide them with sustenance, but the landscape was unforgiving. Nothing grew here. No signs of life, except for the creatures that hunted them from the shadows. The planet's toxic atmosphere poisoned everything it touched, leaving only the bones of what might have been a thriving world. In the early morning hours, the group stumbled upon a small creek, but the water was not clear. It was a sickly greenish hue and bubbled with a strange, oily substance. Desperation clouded their judgment. The soldiers, tired and weakened, hesitated. The prisoners, their resolve hardened by years of survival in worse conditions, pushed forward, scooping the water into their hands, desperate for anything to ease the burning thirst in their throats. The first to drink were the prisoners. They didn't care about the warnings, the sickness that might come with drinking from this foul creek. They had nothing left to lose. As they gulped down the water, a few of the soldiers watched with growing concern, knowing that their time was running out. If the water was toxic, it would be the end of them. But then something strange happened. The prisoners began to fall silent. Their eyes widened in surprise, as if the water had an effect they had not anticipated. The first few sips seemed to revive them, giving them the energy they had lost over the past few days. The soldiers, still cautious, reluctantly took a few sips themselves. To their shock, the water didn't make them sick. It didn't kill them. Instead, they felt something within them shift. The exhaustion that had plagued them for days seemed to fade away. It was not long before they realized that the water wasn't simply nourishing them, it was changing them. Some of the prisoners began to notice a strange feeling in their bodies, a surge of power coursing through their veins. The soldiers who had relied on their training and discipline to survive, now felt a sense of strength that was unlike anything they had known before. It was as if the water had unlocked something deep within them, an energy they didn't know they had. They began to move faster, more determined than ever. Their chains, once a symbol of their punishment, no longer felt like an obstacle. Instead, they felt like something that could be overcome. Together, the soldiers and prisoners moved forward with renewed purpose, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. As they ventured further into the planet's wastelands, the group began to discover more about their surroundings. The ruins they had wandered through were not just buildings. They were remnants of a long-lost civilization. They uncovered strange artifacts, ancient technology that still seemed to hum with life. There were signs of something much older than the aliens who had brought them here, and the more they explored, the more questions they had. One thing was clear though, the aliens had not just brought them here to die. There was something more to this planet, something that the aliens were either too afraid to face or perhaps something they needed. The group began to wonder if they were meant to be more than just pawns in a game of survival. Perhaps they had been chosen for a reason. The first real clue came when they stumbled upon an enormous structure buried deep beneath the surface of the planet. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The walls were smooth, made of a material that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, symbols that none of them recognized. But they all felt a sense of importance, as though this place was the key to understanding why they had been sent here. The prisoners and soldiers approached the structure cautiously. The air around it was dense with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly as if the planet itself was alive. With every step they took, the tension grew. There was something inside that structure, something waiting for them. They had no idea what it was, but they knew that it was the reason they had been brought to this hellish world. For the first time since their arrival, the soldiers and prisoners put aside their differences. They didn't trust each other completely, but they knew that if they were going to survive, they would have to work together. They had no choice but to explore the mysterious structure and discover what secrets it held. Every part of their journey had led them here, and they were about to find out what the aliens wanted them to do. The unknown loomed ahead, and the question on everyone's mind was clear. Was this structure their salvation or the beginning of something far worse? Asterisk. The air inside the strange structure was colder than the outside world. It felt like they had stepped into another dimension, one untouched by the harsh elements of the toxic planet. The walls around them hummed with a faint vibration, sending tremors through their bodies as they moved deeper into the dark corridors. The flickering light from their makeshift torches cast eerie shadows, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty halls, amplifying the silence. It was clear to everyone that they were no longer walking in a simple ruin. This place was ancient, far older than anything they had seen on the surface of the planet. The architecture was unlike anything the soldiers had studied, and the technology they began to uncover was beyond human comprehension. It didn't take long for them to realize that this was not a place built by the aliens, but rather something much older. Something that might have been forgotten by time itself. The prisoners, though initially skeptical, were now drawn into the mystery of the place. They had spent their lives on Earth in prisons, cut off from the world, and now surrounded by this otherworldly structure. They could feel something stirring inside them. The water they had drunk had given them strength, but it was more than just physical power. It was as if it was unlocking something deep within their minds as well. The combination of their growing unity and newfound abilities created an air of anticipation. No one spoke much, but everyone felt the pull to explore further. At the center of the structure, they found something that none of them expected, a massive chamber with walls covered in intricate carvings. Some of the carvings resembled the alien symbols they had seen on the surface, but others were different, more complex. They depicted scenes of celestial bodies, strange creatures, and machines beyond their understanding. The carvings seemed to tell a story, but it was a story that none of them could fully comprehend. In the center of the chamber was a large, cylindrical device, pulsating with an unnatural glow. It was unlike anything the soldiers had ever seen. There were no buttons or switches, just smooth, organic-like curves that seemed to shift and move as if the structure itself were alive. The device felt almost sentient, as if it were watching them, studying them, waiting for something. The group hesitated, unsure of what to do. The prisoners, ever more attuned to survival, were the first to step forward. They had nothing to lose. The soldiers, though cautious, followed. They were now bound together in more ways than one. They had crossed an invisible line that separated them from the past, and now they were forced to confront the unknown. One of the prisoners, a man named Cadden, who had once been a scientist before his fall from grace, reached out to touch the device. His fingers brushed against the surface, and suddenly, a surge of energy shot through him. His body trembled, and for a brief moment, he felt as though his mind was expanding beyond the confines of his body. He saw visions, flashes of a long-lost civilization, an advanced species that had once thrived on this planet, before it was consumed by its own hubris. They had created machines that could alter time, space, and reality itself. But in their ambition, they had unleashed a power they could not control, and it had destroyed them. The vision was brief, but it was enough to make Cadden pull his hand away in shock. His eyes were wide, his breath ragged as he turned to the group. This is not just a weapon," he gasped. "It's a power source. A device capable of channeling unimaginable energy. And it's connected to everything that has happened to us." The soldiers exchanged wary glances. They had heard rumors, whispers among the prisoners, that the aliens were not just invaders, they were scavengers. They were after something hidden on this planet. Now they were beginning to understand. The aliens didn't just want to conquer Earth. They were seeking control of this ancient power, a force that could give them dominion over the entire galaxy. But what did this have to do with them? Why had the aliens chosen to bring them here, to chain them together, and force them to endure this nightmare? Cadden continued, his voice trembling with the weight of his realization. The aliens knew about this power. They must have. But they don't understand it fully. We've been brought here because we're the key. This power can't be controlled by just anyone. It requires something else, something human. The soldiers and prisoners stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean, something human?" One of the soldiers, named Lieutenant Daniels, asked. Cadden swallowed hard, his mind racing. "The aliens have underestimated us. We weren't just brought here to be punished, we were brought here because we're the ones who can unlock this power. We've been chosen, not as slaves, but as catalysts. The water, the strange strength we feel, it's connected to this. It's a part of us, a part of what makes us human." It was a chilling thought, but there was no denying the truth in Cadden's words. The aliens had underestimated the human spirit. They had thought they could break humanity, make them fight each other, but instead, they had created something even more dangerous, people united by a force they didn't understand. Now, the group stood at a crossroads. They could either continue to follow the aliens' orders, staying shackled in chains, or they could take control of their own destiny. This power could be their weapon, their way of escaping the aliens' grip and taking the fight to them. But it wouldn't be easy. The aliens would not let them leave this place without a fight, and there was still much about the power in the chamber that they didn't understand. With the knowledge of their potential now clear, the group made a decision. They would fight. But this was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for freedom, for control of their future. They began to prepare, gathering whatever resources they could, building a plan to take the power for themselves. But they knew that they were not alone. The aliens would come, and when they did, the true battle for this toxic planet would begin. Asterisk, the decision to claim the power buried deep within the ancient structure was not made lightly. With every passing moment, the weight of the choice pressed harder on the group. They now knew what they were facing, a hidden force capable of changing everything. It was no longer about just surviving the aliens' cruel punishment. It was about taking back control of their fate, and possibly even the future of their home planet. Earth. As the group huddled together in the dim light of the chamber, they formulated their plan. The device in the center of the room pulsed with energy, almost as if it were alive, waiting for something or someone to activate it. The power they had felt earlier, the strange surge that coursed through their veins when they drank the toxic water, was connected to this mysterious force. But no one fully understood how it worked, or how they could use it. "Whatever happens, we need to stick together," Lieutenant Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "This is our only chance to take the fight to them. If we fail here, there may be no coming back." Cadden nodded, his eyes still wide from the vision he had experienced. He was the one who understood the most about the device, but even he felt overwhelmed by its true nature. The vision had shown him glimpses of the past, a civilization destroyed by its own hubris, their creation turning against them. He had no illusion that this power would come without consequences. But what choice did they have? They were trapped on a hostile planet, at the mercy of the aliens who had brought them here. It was either this power or certain death. For the next few hours they worked in near silence, preparing for what was to come. The prisoners, once hesitant, now took part in the planning, their survival instincts kicking in. The soldiers, too, realized that the lines between them were no longer so clear-cut. In this place, they were all just human united by the same purpose, fighting for the same goal. The chains that bound them together had become a symbol of their newfound unity, a bond forged not in punishment, but in the desperate desire to survive. Finally, they were ready. The moment of truth had arrived. Cadden stood before the device, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch it once more. This time, there was no hesitation. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, more powerful than before. His vision blurred, and he staggered back, almost collapsing as the power within the machine began to awaken. The chamber around them seemed to come alive. The walls vibrated with a low hum, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The symbols etched into the walls glowed faintly, their meaning becoming clearer with every passing second. The device in the center of the room pulsed with intensity, its glow brighter and more dangerous than before. "We have to act quickly," Cadden shouted, his voice strained as the power surged through him. "It's reacting to me. But it's unstable. If we don't harness it now, it could destroy us all." With no time to waste, the group moved into action. The soldiers set up a perimeter, watching for any sign of the aliens, while the prisoners worked to find a way to stabilize the device. They were determined, now more than ever. This was their chance to fight back. Cadden, his mind racing, scanned the symbols on the walls. They weren't just decorative, they were instructions, guides for how to activate the device. He could feel the energy in the room growing stronger, and he realized that they had no choice but to use the power to its fullest potential. It was the only way to gain control of their situation. But as they worked, the first signs of danger began to emerge. The walls trembled more violently, and the low hum of the structure turned into a loud, mechanical roar. It was as if the planet itself was protesting their actions. The ground cracked open, and from the fissures, dark tendrils of smoke began to rise. The chamber, once a place of strange beauty, now felt like a tomb, one that was about to be sealed. "Shut forever. We've disturbed something we shouldn't have," muttered Lieutenant Daniels, his eyes scanning the trembling room. "We have no choice," Cadden replied, gritting his teeth. "If we don't take control of this, the aliens will." They'll use it against us. It's either us or them. Just as the tension reached its peak, a loud, deafening roar echoed through the structure. The alien ships, which had been silent until now, began to move. Their engines roared to life as they descended from the skies, their shadows casting an ominous pall over the group below. The aliens had come. They were not going to let the humans seize the power without a fight. The prisoners and soldiers looked up in unison. They could see the alien ships forming a circle in the sky, ready to descend. The aliens had underestimated them once before, but now, it was clear they were prepared. We need to activate it now. Cadden yelled with a surge of desperation. Cadden pressed his hand into the center of the device. His body felt as if it were being torn apart by the power that flowed into him. The energy coursed through him, amplifying everything: his thoughts, his senses, his strength, until it felt as though he had become one with the device. The structure on them began to hum louder, the walls vibrating violently. The energy was alive and it was responding to them. The group held their breath, waiting for the explosion of power that would change everything. As the alien ships descended toward them, the energy from the device reached a boiling point. With one final push, Cadden released everything he had into the machine. The ground shook, and a blinding light exploded from the center of the structure. The air became charged with electricity, and the alien ships above faltered as if struck by an invisible force. For a moment, everything was silent, as if time itself had frozen. Then, the ground beneath them cracked open even more, and a massive shockwave of energy erupted from the device, sending the alien ships reeling. The power had been unleashed, but whether it would be enough to turn the tide in their favor, no one knew. The blinding light from the device engulfed the chamber, casting a brilliance so intense that it seemed to tear at the very fabric of the world around them. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, as if the planet itself was responding to the release of power. The air crackled with energy, and the previously silent alien ships in the sky began to move erratically, their engines sputtering as if struck by an invisible force. For a moment, everything froze. The energy surged through the chamber, pushing outward in every direction like a wave crashing upon the shore. The alien ships swerved and jerked, their lights flickering in an eerie dance of panic. Then, the shockwave hit. The explosion of force tore through the air, sending a ripple of destruction across the landscape. The alien ships that had hovered above the group suddenly lurched to the side, as if thrown by an invisible hand. Some spiraled out of control, while others collided with each other in a chaotic dance of metal and fire. The power from the device wasn't just physical, it was manipulating the very forces of nature, disrupting the alien ship's navigation systems. As the shockwave subsided, the group stood stunned in the aftermath. The room had grown quiet once more, but the silence was thick with tension. The device, now glowing faintly in the center of the room, had calmed, its power receding for the moment. Did it work? A voice whispered, trembling with uncertainty. Cadden was the first to move. His body was still humming with the energy he had channeled, but it was starting to fade, leaving him weak and dizzy. I think it did, he said, his voice strained. The ships ... they're damaged. We have a chance. The soldiers, now more determined than ever, rallied together, ready to take advantage of the situation. The prisoners, too, had found strength in the shared experience, and though they had been the outcasts before, they now stood alongside the soldiers as equals. The chains that bound them together no longer felt like a symbol of their punishment, but a representation of the bond they had forged in the fires of adversity. Now we move, Lieutenant Daniels ordered, his voice steady and commanding. We need to get to the surface and finish what we started. The group quickly made their way out of the chamber, moving through the winding corridors with purpose. The once perfect ruins were now disintegrating, the tremors from the released energy shaking the foundation of the structure. It was clear that the device was too unstable to remain in operation for much longer. They had to act fast. As they emerged from the structure, they found the alien ships in disarray. Several had crashed to the ground in a twisted mess of metal and fire, while others hovered uneasily in the sky, seemingly unable to maintain their position. The sky itself seemed to pulse with the energy that had been unleashed. The once ominous green hue now shifted into an unnatural violet, as if the planet itself had been altered by the power from the device. The soldiers and prisoners didn't hesitate. They ran toward the wreckage of the alien ships, weapons drawn. The soldiers had their firearms, while the prisoners, many of whom had lived on the fringes of society, had adapted quickly to the harsh conditions of the planet and scavenged whatever they could from the wreckage. Makeshift weapons, sharpened debris, and even alien technology were now in their hands. The fight was chaotic. The alien forces, disoriented and damaged, were scrambling to recover. But they were not defenseless. They had their own weapons, their own technology, and they fought with the same brutal efficiency that had crushed Earth's defenses. The air was filled with the sounds of weapons fire, explosions, and the desperate cries of both human and alien soldiers. But there was something different this time. The group, united by their struggle and their newfound power, fought with a desperation and determination that the aliens couldn't match. The chains, once a symbol of their punishment, had transformed into a source of strength. They had been forged together in the fires of adversity, and now they fought as one. As the battle raged on, the group made their way to the central command ship, the largest and most intact of the alien vessels. It was hovering just above the ground, surrounded by the wreckage of the others. The ship was heavily guarded, but the humans had no intention of backing down. This was their chance to end the invasion once and for all. Cadden led the charge, his body still pulsing with the energy from the device. He felt the power within him, like a fire that could not be contained. As he approached the ship, the energy within him surged once again. He could feel the device calling to him, urging him to take control, but there was something more. He could sense the presence of the alien leader, the one who had masterminded the invasion. The being was waiting for him, aware of what had happened and what was about to come. It had been watching them from the moment they landed on the planet. And now, it was ready to face them. The leader appeared before them, a towering figure cloaked in dark, shimmering armor. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its voice echoed through the air like 1,000 whispers. "You have done well to reach this far," the alien leader said, its voice cold and calculating. "But you are too late. This planet will be mine. And you ... you are nothing but tools for my will." Caden's heart raced as he stood before the leader. He could feel the weight of the power in his hands, the energy from the device coursing through him, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He turned to the group, his eyes meeting theirs. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "We have the power to stop them. We have to do this together." With a unified cry, the group charged at the alien leader. The final battle for control of the planet had begun. The final showdown had begun. Cadn and the group of soldiers and prisoners, now united as one, charged forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could feel the weight of the decision they had made, the consequences of their actions, but there was no turning back. The alien leader, towering over them, stood at the center of the battlefield, its eyes burning with contempt as it watched them approach. "You are foolish," the alien leader hissed, its voice echoing in their minds. "You think you can challenge me? You think you can control the power of this world? You are nothing." But Cadden didn't flinch. The power within him, the energy from the device, surged once again, filling his body with strength and clarity. It was the same energy that had allowed them to survive, to fight, and to defy the odds. It was more than just power. It was a force of will, of determination, and of unity. The humans, broken and divided by the aliens' cruelty, had come together as something greater than the sum of their parts. "We may be nothing to you," Cadden said, his voice steady. "But together we are everything. You underestimated us. You thought we were weak, but we are stronger than you know." The alien leader's eyes flickered with anger, and it raised its weapon, a massive energy lance, capable of disintegrating anything in its path. But before it could strike, Cadden pushed forward, and the energy from the device pulsed through him like a wave. He could feel it now, more than ever, a force that had been lying dormant within him, waiting for this moment. With a shout, Cadden thrust his hands forward, and the energy surged outward, crashing into the alien leader's weapon. The blast shattered the lance, sending sparks flying in every direction. The leader staggered back, surprised by the sudden power that had come from the humans. The group pressed on, attacking with everything they had. The soldiers fired their weapons while the prisoners, fueled by their newfound strength, charged with brutal determination. Every blow they struck, every shot they fired, was a defiance of the aliens' control. They were no longer prisoners. They were warriors, fighting not just for their own survival, but for the survival of the entire planet. The alien leader, however, was far from defeated. It roared in fury and raised its hands, summoning a storm of energy that crackled through the air. The ground beneath them trembled, and the sky above darkened with swirling clouds. The alien forces that had been scattered across the battlefield began to regroup, rallying around their leader, and the final battle took shape before their eyes. But the humans had something the aliens didn't: each other. Cadden could feel the connection between them. It was like a thread binding them together, stronger than the chains that had once held them down. The water, the power, the device, it had unlocked something deep within them, not just physically but mentally. They had become more than a team. They had become a force of nature, a collective will strong enough to stand against the alien invaders. With a final deafening cry, Cadden unleashed the full extent of the energy within him, and a massive wave of power erupted from the device. It shot through the air, illuminating the battlefield in a brilliant light that blinded the aliens and knocked them off their feet. The leader tried to retaliate, but its energy was no match for the force the humans had awakened. The power was too great. The alien leader stumbled, its body writhing in the wake of the energy blast. It let out a final guttural scream, before collapsing to the ground in a heap of smoldering armor. The remaining alien forces, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. They had come to this world with the belief that they were invincible, that they were untouchable. But now they realized they were not. With their leader gone and their forces shattered, the remaining aliens turned and fled, retreating into the skies above. The battle was over. The group stood in the aftermath, panting and covered in the dust of the battlefield. They were exhausted, battered, but victorious. The power that had once been a mystery, a force beyond their understanding, had become their weapon, and with it, they had taken back control of their fate. Cadden looked around at the group: soldiers, prisoners, men, and women standing side by side. They had been through hell together, and they had emerged stronger for it. They were no longer defined by their past or by the chains that had bound them. They were free. "It's over," Cadden said quietly, his voice filled with relief. "We did it." Lieutenant Daniels, his face smeared with dirt, but a smile breaking through, nodded. "Yeah, we did. We saved each other. And we saved this planet." But as the group looked up at the alien ships retreating into the sky, there was a shared understanding. Among them, this battle was won, but the war was not over. The aliens would return. But now they knew what they were capable of. They had tasted the power of the device, and they knew how to use it. They were ready. They had become something new, something powerful. The chains that had once bound them together were now gone, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and unity. The battle for Earth, for their freedom, was just beginning. But no matter what came next, They would face it together. Asterisk.